Thanks very much, Ruth. Also, thank you to the organisers for inviting me, particularly for promoting me to become a professor for the morning, which is great. What I was asked to do was to talk about research perspectives on how Scotland's responding to a changing environment, changing climate. And what I thought I'd do is just flag 4 different points. One of which is, what do these particular drivers, both the policy drivers and the commercial drivers, require of researchers? Because that has changed quite dramatically over the years. And what's being done in Scotland and elsewhere to support these drivers, in terms of networks and programmes? How can we improve on joining up research efforts and uptake of research? And I'll come on to that uptake towards the end by just touching on this issue of innovation. And whether we're talking about policy innovation or business innovation, there are some issues which I just want to flag to you and maybe challenge you a little bit. Just in terms of that first point, Dominic this morning commented that often the research is following, or at least the policy frameworks are going far ahead of the research, and that's absolutely right. That's why I put it that way around, which is that the policy drivers and the commercial drivers are driving a particular direction, and research is having to run to catch up. Just in terms of the policy and the commercial drivers that exist, I'm not going to labour this point because you saw a lot of that this morning. I just want to flag that what has gone on through the Climate Change Scotland Act is not the same as what is going on, say, with the renewable energy policy pledges. But they're not identical, and that these are driving other alternative issues which don't necessarily reduce carbon in the way that we count carbon. So, for example, renewable electricity production itself won't help us deliver our Climate Change Scotland Act in the short term. So there are distinctions between the two. They're all policy drivers which are driving very radical changes in the way in which we produce and consume energy and use land over the next 10 and 20 years. Again, we've seen this figure before. We've got to hit about 41 million tonnes in 2020. 14 million tonnes in 2050. So we're talking about a radical change in the way in which we produce and use energy. The other issue, which I just want to flag, is that there are very powerful commercial drivers going on at the moment, which are affecting not just our urban environments, but also our rural land use. And 2 of them, which I'll flag, one is around cost of commodities. This is a graph of Brent crude oil prices over the last 5 or 6 years. Now and you can see where it goes up to nearly 150, and now we're about between 110 and 120. That has been a major driver for businesses right there across the piece, whether it's farms, energy-intensive industries and so on. Just as a little background, when I first started getting involved in climate change programmes 10, 12 years ago, there was a paper that was published by the UK government called Energy Paper 68, and it was essentially the forward look for the next 10 years, to 2010, for what the energy and emissions profiles for the UK would look like. Now it's an econometric modelling paper. They had to put certain assumptions in about future prices, for example, oil prices. The low price that they put in for the 10 years to 2010 was $10 a barrel. Can anybody tell me what the high price they put in? 20. Now, that was the assumption, was that we were living in a period of low fossil fuel prices, because their gas prices and their coal prices also have equally unrealistic assumptions. But it's just a flag that we do not know what the future holds. And so a lot of the issue is not, can we predict the future, but rather if we are setting up scenario-based analyses of the future, to use the extremes, not just what we think might be extreme, but the real extremes, because they're the big issues. The other big commercial driver that's going on at the moment are straightforward opportunities as opposed to the downside of the costs. That's just a figure that's been, that floats around in terms of the amount that's being invested in clean technology around the world at the moment. So that was in 2010, up $240 billion. Some of that was government spending, some of that was industry spending, a heavy chunk of it was in China, but this is huge opportunities for businesses, and it's one that many businesses in Scotland are taking a lead on, so we're doing very well in this space. But these are the sorts of commercial drivers that are changing what's going on. What do these require of researchers? How do these drivers change what researchers need, or sorry, what researchers can produce, can develop? One thing I think we've all flagged, and I think listening in on the workshop people are very aware of, is the whole issue of policy and business relevance. 10 years ago, when I was still active in science, the notion that you had to actually go and talk to stakeholders was a bit of a passe, you didn't worry about that sort of thing. 5 years ago, then you had to sort of actually put a formal impact statement if you were doing a research council project. Now there's much more of an expectation that you should engage properly with stakeholders. So the whole issue of making sure that what you're doing, not necessarily saying that there shouldn't be blue skies research, but that if you are doing research that is associated with applied impacts, you ought to at least be going and engaging with the people who might be impacted by, say, climate change. And a very good example of what I mean by business or policy relevance came this week or last week when Edinburgh City Council came to us with a question. And they said, we are having a review of our winter resilience. Should we, the question they're posing to themselves is, should we invest a large sum of money in ensuring that we have better snow clearing equipment available for the city? So the question to us was, is it more or less likely that there will be cold, extreme weather events going forward than there are now? In other words, are we likely to use this stuff that comes along? Now, funnily enough, at the same time, a couple of days ago, the Transport Committee of the UK Parliament published a report about the winter resilience of transport infrastructure in the UK last winter. And one of the things that the Chief Scientist, John Beddington, said in a response to that inquiry was, no, actually our models are very bad at picking anticyclone blocking high pressures, and therefore we're actually not in a very good position to predict whether we're going to get another series of cold winters going forward. So there is a real challenge in terms of, can we make something that's useful? Because a lot of the councils were saying, the Met Office, I know Alex is here, and I'd love to hear actually from Alex, but one of the issues that the council said is that a statement of seasonal forecast which says that we have, say, a 60% likelihood that the season will be cooler than average is not actually very helpful for decision making. It is scientifically true, and there's a lot of science that goes in behind it. So it's very good science, but making that relevant to councils or to governments is very, very challenging, as Alex will know. The other issue, I think, is on the thematic point. We obsess, and I'm sort of speaking to a lot of people who are in the environmental science space, we tend to stay together. It was a point that Anne made, it was a point that Dominic made. We love being together. And yet, if we're talking about impacts of something like climate change and how do we respond to it, how can you not engage people? And therefore, how can you not engage social science? So one of the challenges is, how do we create more of a thematic focus away from individual disciplines so it's more thematic? And the other one is this business of just being outward facing, which is just understanding more about how you package up information, communications, to make it meaningful to other people. And the way in which we misinform or miscommunicate, not deliberately, but just because of the way we speak or package up information. This little cartoon's a sort of classic stock market thing, somebody at the end saying, I've got stock to really excel, sell. So you start from saying this is a great stock to simply trying to sell it, all the way back to buying it. That's simply because of the way in which we communicate. So the issues of communication of science become absolutely critical. What's been done in Scotland to support these sorts of developments, these changes? Well, we've got, as Angela said this morning, some fantastic opportunities in Scotland, because we've got things like research pools which are getting rid of some of the institutional divides that have divided us. And some of them have been very, very successful. We've also got increasingly research council drivers which are saying we're trying to create thematic programs to, again, support cross-disciplinary thinking. We've got a lot of work at government